All right, now that we've learned all about the different types of anxiety, the signs and symptoms that we experience with these anxieties, and just how common this really is, let's talk about how anxiety works. We want to know how anxiety functions within our brain and our body. So in order to treat anxiety effectively, we really need to know what's going on. As mental health therapists, when we treat anxiety, we often start with using psychoeducation. So psychoeducation is just a fancy term to say we teach our clients all about how anxiety functions. And by being more informed, it allows our clients to feel more in control of what's going on. It's less scary. It feels less like someone else is in charge and more like we are in charge of ourselves. All right, so as most of you probably know, there is a biological component to anxiety, just like any other health condition. Let's say heart disease, cancer, diabetes. Typically, these come from or are at least influenced by our genetics, our genes, the things that we inherit from the people before us, our parents, our grandparents. This means that those of us who have anxiety are pretty likely to have someone else in our family that also experiences anxiety. I know that's true for me. I know, hi Mom. Mom would probably say that she has definitely been an anxious person her entire life. Her father before her, my grandfather, was a very anxious man. He worried all the time. And some of these things are what caused this anxiety to be normalized within my family. And I think that happens a lot with other families as well. We think this is just how it is. It doesn't have to be that way though. So let's talk about the other impacts or the other influences. Let's talk a little bit more about how genes impact anxiety. So in our brains, there's these things called neurotransmitters. Again, just a fancy way of saying chemicals in our brains. Most of you have probably heard about serotonin. So serotonin is the chemical in our brain that helps us to feel calm, to feel happy, to feel more relaxed, generally speaking. Some positive emotions and feelings come along with serotonin. Studies have shown that serotonin plays a huge role in both anxiety and depression. And so we know that the way our genes interact with serotonin, simply speaking, really impacts the occurrence of us having anxiety or depression. So we frequently hear the term or the acronym SSRIs used when we're talking about anxiety. So SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And they focus on the serotonin in our brain to make sure that it's functioning appropriately. There's the right level of serotonin in our brain so that we do have the ability to feel calm, to feel emotionally stable. For some people, medication is necessary and appropriate, but for others, it's not. And so everyone is different. We're not going to focus too much on the medication piece today, but I think it's important to know that particular piece so that we know how anxiety really does function within our brain chemically. So it's not just our genes that impact the occurrence of anxiety or other mental health conditions for us. Studies have also shown that we tend to see very observable traits or tendencies, some characteristics in even newborn babies that show that their temperament may make them more susceptible, I guess you should say, to developing anxiety down the road. So probably you've heard parents talk about maybe how different two of their children were. So maybe mom says, that first child, she was scared of everything. Every time there was a loud noise, she jumped, she needed me, she wanted to be held all the time. A child like that has a predisposition for being a little more sensitive to environmental stimulation. There are other kids that might sit in the same exact room and hear the same sound and be less bothered by it. Generally speaking, those of us who are more sensitive to sensory stimulation tend to be more susceptible to anxiety. So this sensitivity and intense response to stimuli tends to last throughout our lifespan. And so it doesn't just change from, when we were a baby, we were pretty nervous all the time. Now they just grew out of it. It doesn't really just work like that. It's part of us. And so we have to work to be able to change that. And we will talk some more later about how we do that. So again, those of us who are more sensitive to stressors, external environment, things like that, we are more likely to experience anxiety. We tend to experience it more frequently, we tend to experience the symptoms more intensely, and we tend to be more likely to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. All right, so it's really important to note that genetics are not the only thing that play a role in developing anxiety or other mental health disorders for that matter. In the development of anxiety, there is typically the components of nature, which are those genetic predispositions, those temperamental predispositions, and also nurture. So the things that go on around us in our environment. So that might be our upbringing. For me and a lot of others like me, you do have people around you who talk about their anxieties, who sort of live in an anxious state. And you do feel that. You know it. It becomes normal. Additionally, we also have traumatic events or just stressful events that occur in our lives. We've all experienced something that has caused us a trigger of anxiety at one time or another. And for people who have that genetic predisposition and also have some sort of environmental factor, it can really set off anxiety. And so these people are more likely to have anxiety than those that just experience one or the other. Studies show that it's almost equally influential, nature and nurture. They both play a big role in why we develop anxiety. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the genetic components and the biological components of anxiety, next we're going to look at the neuroscience behind anxiety. So again, this is in an effort to understand how anxiety works so that we can better treat it and feel empowered and that we are in control of our own lives.